Today in Tarkir Dragonstorm, we get an uncommon dragon that just might be one of the most busted cards in the entire set, and so much more. Let's break it down. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffrona, and it's time for another daily dose of Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers. So we're nearing the end of spoiler season. We should have the full set on Friday, and honestly at this point, there's like one mythic left, a handful of rares, we got all the commander precons, so there's really not a ton left to reveal. But today, we get some sweet rares and an uncommon that is just jaw-droppingly ridiculous, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking sweet new Tarkir Dragonstorm cards. Before we do, a couple of quick reminders. First, if you need any of these cards, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Second, to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, let's talk some Tarkir Dragonstorm. First up today, we get a new black 2-drop in Sinkhole Surveyor. So Sinkhole Surveyor, it's a 2-mana 1/3 bird scout with flying. It says when this creature attacks, you lose a life and this creature endures 1. So you put a +1/+1 counter on it, or you can create a 1/1 white spirit creature token without flying, which is always important to remember because I always think these spirits are going to have flying. So Sinkhole Surveyor, if you squint hard enough, it's kind of Bid Bird Blossom. I mean, it's a black 2-drop that every turn can make a token and lose you a life. And if you want the upside case for this card, it's a 2-drop that does snowball by itself, and it can win the game by itself. If you can play this on turn 2, and then attack on turn 3, it grows itself to a 2/4, attack the next turn, it's up to a 3/5. It only takes 5 turns of attacking for this to actually generate lethal damage. So that by itself is very powerful. The question is that actually realistic to do in our current standard? And I feel like the answer is probably no. The turn you play it dies to cut down. Even later, Get Lost, This Town, Witchtalker Frenzy, pretty much every color in every deck is going to have some way to deal with this card. And the colors it might not, like mono red mice or something, they're probably just going to kill you and take advantage of the fact that you're losing some life to this card. So that's concern number one, is there's just so much interaction in this standard. The other concern I have is there's just a lot of competition. When I was going to actually do the spoiler video for this card, I went to Scryfall and I typed in creatures with mana value 2 in standard, and over 500 popped up. It's one of the downsides, and I guess also upsides, of having 3 years of cards in standard. So is Sinkhole Surveyor, even if it's a good card, is it better than Deep Cavern Bat and Caustic Bronco, in some decks Vadmir? Is it better than the new Rot Curse Rakshasha? That's what I'm not really clear on. I would say that probably not, and if you expand out to like 2-color decks, you're also competing with Fairy Mastermind and Namir, Mosswood Dread Knight and Golgari, Fear of Missing Out if you're in Rakdos. So when you add all this together, I feel like this card is not going to be that great in standard. I really wish it was a bat. This card would work so well in bats if it was a bat, because then you could gain back some of the life with all your bat synergies. It gives you another powerful 2-drop. But unfortunately, as a bird scout, I'm just not really sure where this card goes in standard. So Sinkhole Surveyor, I don't think it's a bad card. It's a cheap card that can snowball into a victory. I'm just not sure that snowballing is really going to be realistic in standard. So we'll have to wait and see. Again, not a bad card by any stretch. I'm just not sure it's better than the other options we already have in standard. We also got a new blue 2-drop enchantment, which is pretty spicy, but honestly, from a competitive perspective, I think might be one of the least playable rares in the set. So Stillness in Motion, a 2-mana enchantment. So at the beginning of your upkeep, you mill 3 cards. Then, if your library has no cards in it, exile this enchantment and put 5 cards from your graveyard on the top of your library in any order. So Stillness in Motion, it's kind of like a cheaper Cemetery Tampering just by itself for most of the game. It's just going to sit out and mill 3 cards each turn. So it is a way you can fill your graveyard. If you just want to mill 3 every turn, this does get it done. And then eventually, you essentially get a Doomsday style effect that once you're able to empty your entire library, you get to Doomsday from your graveyard and put 5 cards on the top of your deck, which hopefully you can stack in a way that you'll be able to win the game with those 5 cards. That's just a big ask, right? The power of Doomsday is you can just cast it and do it. With Stillness in Motion, you have to empty your entire deck to get the Doomsday out of it, which is just kind of a lot of effort. So as far as Standard is concerned, there are plenty of decks that want to fill your graveyard. We got a Pornoculus decks, we got Omniscience Reanimation decks, we have 3 new clans that care about the graveyard in one way or another. We have Teamer with the Harmonized mechanic, we got Sultai with stuff like Tevel, we have Abzan that's all about the graveyard and reanimation and graveyard shenanigans. So there's a bunch of different places that you would want the effect of milling 3 cards. The question for Stillness in Motion: is it just better than playing a Picklock Prankster or a Felici Archaeologist or a Founding the Third Path? And I think the answer is probably no. Like, the upside of Stillness in Motion is it just mills 3 every single turn. Starting on turn 3, if you play this on turn 2, you're just going to repeatedly fill your graveyard. But I'm not sure that's better than, like, Picklock Prankster, Felici Archaeologist, Founding the Third Path, which not only fill your graveyard, not as consistently as Stillness in Motion, but they also replace themselves by essentially drawing you a card or doing other things. So I feel like in most decks, I would probably play these cards that replace themselves, because I think even though there is an upside to Stillness in Motion, once you run out of cards in your library, I just don't think most matches, even for self-mill decks, are going to get to the point where you've actually been able to empty your library. Once you get outside of Standard, it kind of gets even worse. So in Modern, we already have Ripples of Undeath, which is 2 mana and mills 3 every single turn, but you get the option of paying a mana and some life to get one of the cards you mill back to your hand. So if you just want to mill 3 each turn, Ripples of Undeath does the same thing, and being able to sometimes draw a card is probably more of an upside than eventually Doomsday. I could see the argument that, okay, what if your deck is actually designed to empty your graveyard? So you're like a grinding station combo deck, where your whole gimmick is, I'm gonna empty my entire deck, then I get Stillness in Motion, then I set up this Doomsday kill. That would work, but then my question is, if you're doing that, is it actually better than just casting a Thassa's Oracle and winning the game? Like, you have this other 2 mana blue card that if you empty your entire deck, you just win the game on the spot. I guess they kind of work together. You can, like, empty your deck and then on your upkeep, Stillness in Motion, put the Thassa's Oracle back in your deck, so then you'll be able to win. Thassa's Oracle is one of the easiest Doomsday pile creatures, but still, I'm not sure that you need the extra step of Stillness in Motion rather than just directly winning with Thassa's Oracle. Although maybe it gets more appealing if Through the Breach gets banned. I don't know, maybe this is like some weird backup, although having to wait to your upkeep is kind of punishing. The final problem I have with this card, let's say you were ambitious, you're playing against the odds deck, and you're like, I'm going to build Doomsday in Standard or Modern, and I'm going to make Stillness in Motion work. I'm going to empty my entire deck, and then I'm going to make this Doomsday pile. That Doomsday pile is going to win me the game. This is a risky plan. Part of why Thassa's Oracle is good is there's very minimal risk. You play it as long as it resolves, even if your opponent kills it, if your library is empty, you win the game. Stillness in Motion is not like that. Because it triggers on your upkeep, what's going to happen is you're going to mill your entire deck, or nearly your entire deck, and your opponent could be like, all right, you go to your upkeep, you put this trigger on your stack for Stillness in Motion, and then I will Besage you, or then I will Wear Tear, or then I will Force a Vigor, something that answers the Stillness in Motion. And then you have no cards in your library, and you don't get a Doomsday, which means you probably just killed yourself on the spot. So Stillness in Motion, the card's super unique, and I love super unique cards, and I hope there is some wacky Doomsday combo that we can build out of this card. My guess is, though, it is more likely that this card actually just ends up being more or less unplayable in every format, and is one of the bulkiest rares from the set. The good news is, we also got maybe one of the most broken cards from the set in Kheru Goldkeeper. And this card, I honestly cannot believe this card was printed in the form it was printed in, especially considering that this is an uncommon. I think this is one of the highest ceiling cards in all of Tarkir Dragonstorm, and that is Kheru Goldkeeper. So it is a 4 mana 3/3 dragon. It's a Sultai card. In its flying, it says whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard during your turn, create a treasure token. And then as Renew, where you can exile it from your graveyard to put 2 counters on something, give it flying. That mode doesn't really matter. The ridiculous part about this card is that first mode, whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard during your turn, create a treasure. Notice this has 0 of the safety valves that they usually put on cards like this these days. It's not once per turn do it. It's not a tap treasure token, which means this is a ridiculous combo engine that can just let you pop off incredibly hard. So yes, it is a 4 mana 3/3, which might keep it from being like dominant in Legacy or something like that. Like, it is a cost to get this 4-drop on the battlefield, but this card can absolutely pop off in so many different decks. So if you think about Standard, We've been getting more and more cards that care about things leaving your graveyard. It kind of started with Desecrated Tune back in Core Set 2019, but recently we've gotten like Insidious Roots, we've gotten Dredger's Insight, these cards that trigger when something leaves your graveyard. A lot of times it's a creature, although in the case of Kheru Goldkeeper, it doesn't even have that restriction. It's not when a creature leaves your graveyard, it's when any card leaves your graveyard. And we have seen with like Dredger's Insight, we've played it in Standard, and we were shocked at just how much we triggered this card. We just played it in like an Insidious Roots deck, and we were ending up at like 35, 40 life just by doing what our deck was doing anyway. If you throw Kheru Goldkeeper into that mix, rather than gaining 20 life or something, you're going to make 20 extra mana in treasures if it sits out on the battlefield, which is absolutely ridiculous. So what are we doing with this card? So first off, it works really well with both of the Tevils that we've seen. Tevel Arbiter of Virtue, the one that we're getting in Standard, the one that gives all of our stuff delve when it's on the battlefield. As we delve stuff, exiling cards from our graveyard will make treasures with Kheru Goldkeeper so we can cast even more cards with delve, assuming we have a full graveyard. Tevel the Balance Scale, the Commander Tevel, is actually just an infinite combo piece with this, which we'll talk more about in a minute. As far as Standard's concerned, most obvious home for this is an Insidious Roots style deck. Some sort of Insidious Roots. If you throw Ketramos in there, which cares about things going to exile, which is the easiest way to have things leave your graveyard a lot of the time, you can set up this engine where every time you exile something from your graveyard, you're like gaining a life with Dredger's Insight, which will make up for the life you lose to Ketramos to draw a card, but this will also trigger Kheru Goldkeeper to make a treasure, so then you can use that mana to do something else to trigger your stuff again. So it's not like fully infinite that I've found in Standard, but you should have this huge turn where you just go pseudo infinite, play through your entire deck. It's going to be ridiculous. Then there's also just even easier combos, like Scavenging Ooze, for example. 1 green mana, exile a card from a graveyard. If it's a creature, it gets bigger and you gain a life. So this is 1 green mana, make a treasure token. So essentially, you can activate your Scavenging Ooze as many times as you want to, using the treasure to keep playing for Scavenging Ooze. Obviously, by itself, that doesn't really do anything. But let's say you have a Ketramos out as you're doing this, then you're going to be drawing a ton of cards. Let's say you have a Dredger's Insight out as you're doing this, then you're going to be gaining a ton of life. Let's say you have an Insidious Roots out while you're doing this. So that's another way you can use this card. Molt Tender, really good at exiling cards from the graveyard. Even like Cash Grab. You cast a Cash Grab, you mill some cards, one of those goes back to your hand, that's going to trigger your Goldkeeper. So essentially all your Cash Grab effects become 1 mana instead of 2 mana because you can use that treasure to make another mana. There's just so many synergies for this card. In Standard, we also have Forsaken Miner, Bloodghast. If you throw a Sack Outlet into the mix, you can kind of pop off with these cards coming back from your graveyard, which is again another card leaving your graveyard, which is going to make a treasure. I don't think we have the right pieces in Standard. Forsaken Miner, if you have a Altar of Dementia, can just go infinite. You sack the Forsaken Miner to mill your opponent equal to the power of Forsaken Miner, which will be a crime, which will trigger the Forsaken Miner, and you get the treasure from Goldkeeper, which then you can use to get the Forsaken Miner back to start the loop over again. So that's another easy way to go infinite. Although, like I said, I don't think we have the pieces to do that in Standard. Once you get outside of Standard, there's like infinite combos for this card. A Gravecrawler with a Phyrexian Altar and a zombie. Normally this lets you cast Gravecrawl an infinite amount of times, but if you have a Goldkeeper, now you're getting 2 mana every time you go through the loops. You're actually generating infinite mana as you go through the Gravecrawler combo. It combos with Tortured Existence. Tortured Existence is old enchantment. 1 black mana, discard a creature card, return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So by itself, just Goldkeeper with Tortured Existence, assuming you have a creature in hand in one of your graveyard, you're just able to activate it an infinite number of times, which doesn't really do anything, right? Like, you make a treasure, then you sack a treasure, you make a treasure, and you sack a treasure. But if you can add just 1 more piece to the mix, then it just straight up wins you the game. So if you have Sir Conrad, every time something leaves the graveyard, your opponents take a damage. You just go infinite, you burn your table out of the game. If you have Tormod the Desecrator or New Tevel, the Commander one, you make infinite 2/2 zombie tokens. If you have Mirkwood Bats, whenever a token is sacrificed or entered, your opponents each lose a life. Then you just burn your opponent out of the game. So Kheru Goldkeeper, Tortured Existence, and a whole bunch of other cards should just win you the game on the spot. It's also kind of ridiculous with Titan's Nest. I remember when Ikoria first came out, Titan's Nest was one of the cards that I thought could be really busted. Just the ability to to exile a card from your graveyard to make a colorless mana, even though it couldn't be spent on colorless cards or on things with X in their cost. I thought this might be absolutely busted. It turned out it wasn't actually that busted, but it works really well with Kheru Goldkeeper, because now every card you exile is essentially going to make 2 mana, which I imagine with a full graveyard, you should be able to use these 2 cards to win the game somehow. If you start adding additional pieces like Goldspan Dragon, so now your treasures make 2 mana, or Academy Manufacturer, so now your treasures come along with a clue and a food, it makes it even easier to go infinite with this card. I've seen some people talking about maybe Oval Chase Daredevil, Psychic Frog, Kheru Goldkeeper in Modern. If you have this set up, you can like discard the Daredevil to the Psychic Frog to get it in the graveyard, then play some random cheap artifact like a Mishra's Bauble. That'll trigger the Daredevil to come back to your hand, and then before the Kheru Goldkeeper treasure trigger resolves, you discard it again to the Psychic Frog to get back in the graveyard, then the treasure comes into play, which will trigger the Daredevil to go back to your hand, and then you can do the same thing, make it infinitely big frog. So that's another potential synergy. In Commander, you can do all these combos we've been talking about, and I think that's the scariest use of this card. But I also think this is just a fine, fair card in something like Madrotha, where you're going to have things leaving your graveyard regularly because of your commander. It's in the right colors. Then you just play this, and you're like, all right, I make 2 or 3 extra mana each turn. That seems perfectly fine to me. So Kheru Goldkeeper seems like one of the highest ceiling cards in the entire set. I think this actually might be one of the most potentially broken cards in all of Tarkir Dragonstorm, which is absolutely wild because it's just a random uncommon. I am absolutely shocked that none of the safety valves are on this card. The fact that it's not a once per turn restriction, the fact that the treasure doesn't come into play tapped, makes this card incredibly abusable. Also worth mentioning, this is actually a part of a random uncommon cycle. The rest of the cycle is perfectly fine. You get 1 card for each of your color combinations. None of the rest of them seem especially playable in Constructed. They seem like good limited bombs, kind of the signpost uncommon thing. But Kheru Goldkeeper, definitely the big winner here. We also got a new 3-drop green Hydra in Warden of the Grove. So Warden of the Grove, a 3-mana 2/2 Hydra. It's a green card. Says the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then whenever another non-token creature you control enters, it endures X, where X is the number of counters on it. So essentially, you get 1 counter on it every new creature you play. You either get to make a 1/1 spirit or put a +1/+1 counter on the new creature. If you can somehow get 10 counters on this, then it becomes kind of wild, right? Where you're able to take in, make a 10/10 every time you play a new creature, put 10 counters on that new creature. So Warden of the Grove, it reminds me a lot of Master Biomancer, Arwen Weaver of Hope, these creatures that sit out on the battlefield and make all your other creatures bigger. Except there's a twist here. Warden of the Grove, it gives you the option to either make your creatures bigger, or it gives you the option to make more creatures, which is a really powerful, flexible option to have. So let's start with why I think this card probably won't actually see play in Standard, and then we'll talk about all the cool things we can try to do with this card. So why do I think this card is probably unplayable, at least from a competitive perspective in Standard? And the answer here is Mossborn Hydra. Mossborn Hydra is an intoxicating card. When I look at this card, I see this 3-drop that I make a bunch of lands and it becomes like 100, and I kill you in 1 attack, and it's gonna be awesome. I've tried multiple times to make Mossborn Hydra decks, and every time Mossborn Hydra has felt like the worst card in the deck. Like, it just doesn't really work in this Standard format where every deck is overloaded on interaction. You got cuts downs in this towns. There's just so many ways to disrupt it. So these creatures that are like super sweet, but they need to sit out on the battlefield for a bunch of turns to be super sweet, they just don't really line up good with the Standard meta. So all this to say, I don't actually expect this card to see competitive play. Also, if you look closely on that art, I didn't think we were in a hat set, but apparently the hats are back. Those look a lot like a bunch of cowboy hats on the Hydra. I'm just saying, back to Outlaws of Thunder Junction we go. So that's the bad news. The card probably won't work in the format, but let's talk about all the cool things we can try to do with this card. So first, it's super sweet in a +1/+1 counter deck. If you can use Ozolith and Bristly Bills or Biogenic Upgrades, which I know is a ton of mana, but bear with me. If you can add a lot of counters to this, the card gets kind of wild, right? If this has 5 counters on it, you play a Novice Inspector, and it's going to be like a 6 6 power creature, or you can make a random 5/5. It can get out of control really quickly. It's also cute with Downey, where you can play Downey, it'll double trigger Warden the first time because it's 2 power, so it gets up to 4 power, gets 2 counters, and then every small creature you play will double trigger to get twice as many counters, so that seems kind of fun. In older formats, it can be an infinite combo piece with Persist. Persist, when the creature dies, if it didn't have a -1/-1 counter on it, you put it back into play with a -1/-1 counter on it. So the idea here is you get Warden with at least 1 counter on it, you have your Murderous Red Cap, and then you have a sack outlet. You sack the Murderous Red Cap, it's going to die, it's going to come back into play with a -1/-1 counter thanks to Persist, but then the +1/+1 counter from Warden will counteract that -1/-1 counter, so you get a normal red cap again, and you can sack it again. Since it deals damage when it enters, you just burn everyone out of the game. So that's another shenanigan for the card. One other thing I'm not sure of, and we gotta wait for the rules confirmation on this, and this is admittedly a pretty Finge thing, but it's actually kind of interesting. So what we don't know about Warden is, what if it has 0 counters on it? Can you endure 0? Why would you want to endure 0? Make a 0/0 or add 0 counters to something? The answer is, if you can endure 0, then technically, whenever you play a non-token creature, you can make a 0/0 creature that will immediately die, and that would trigger like Vengeful Blood Witch or any of your death trigger stuff. So we don't really know at this point, unless there's something specifically in the rules that say you can't endure 0, then you should be able to endure 0. Like I said, a pretty Fringe thing, but it would be pretty funny if a game came down to like triggering this to make a 0/0 to trigger your Blood Artist or whatever. Another place this could be cool is in an Aristocrat stack. We've seen Zahir. If you can get it to max speed, the ability to, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, make a 2/2 token. It's a really good way to double up your sack fodder for Bard or whatever you're trying to do with Aristocrats. Warden can kind of do the same thing, except it triggers on you playing creatures rather than your creatures dying. But if you can get some counters on this and just start making 1/1 endure tokens, that is a lot of sack fodder that you can use for synergistic purposes. So Warden of the Grove, it's the exact kind of card that just doesn't really compete in this standard because of the amount of removal that's running around, but it is also the exact kind of card that can do some spectacular things in the right deck. So might be a good against the odds card. I'd be surprised if it was like a competitive standard card, but I hope it is, because who doesn't love a Hydra in cowboy hats? We also got the rest of the Exhale cycle. So we saw Caustic Exhale way back at the beginning of the spoiler season. Now we got the rest of the cycle. So every color gets one of these Behold the Dragon removal spells, and even though they're commons, they're worth keeping in mind because they pretty much all seem at least somewhat playable, especially if you're a dragon deck. If you're not a dragon deck, you're probably not really playing these cards, but if there's a reasonable chance you're going to be able to behold a dragon and get their full power, pretty much every single one of these seems like they could be playable in standard in a dragon deck. So we knew Caustic Exhale, good early game removal. The red one, Molten Exhale, 2-mana sorcery, 4 damage to a creature or planeswalker, but if you behold a dragon, you can cast it at instant speed, so actually a pretty on-rate removal spell. Dispelling Exhale, probably one of the strongest ones in some sort of controlling dragon deck. 2 mana to counter a spell unless its controller pays 2, but if you behold a dragon, you counter it unless its controller pays 4. So basically, a worse mana leak that becomes a better mana leak, assuming you have a dragon to behold. The white Exhale, not going to try to say that word, Osseous? Maybe I will try to say that word. Let's go with Osseous Exhale. I have no idea what that means. 2 mana instant, 5 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. If you behold a dragon, you gain 2 life. And then the last one, Piercing Exhale, the green one, 2 mana instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature Planeswalker, nice little upside there. And if you behold a dragon, you get to Surveil too. So, like I said, none of these cards are super exciting. We're not going to see some deck build around these effects, but they all seem like very functional removal spells, or in the case of the blue one, interactive spells, assuming you got a bunch of dragons in your deck. So would I play these in Commander? No, I don't really like targeted removal in Commander. Maybe the blue one if I really wanted to, but even then, I'd probably just play a Mana Drain or a counter spell or Arcane Denial or whatever. But in standard, if you're a dragon deck, keep these in mind because these are one of the reasons to be a dragon deck. If you put dragons in your deck, you are rewarded by getting to play these removal spells that no one else is going to get to play. So in the context of standard, in dragons in specific, these cards could actually be relevant. Speaking of really strong uncommons, we got a couple more today, including Frontline Rush. So Frontline Rush, a 2-mana Boros instant. This says choose one. Create 2/1/1 red goblin creature tokens, or target creature gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. So Frontline Rush, if you think about what this card is, It's basically Resolute reinforcements. Yes, you're in Boros rather than in Mono White, but still instant speed 2/1/1s mixed with a super upgraded hair raising from Pollen Shield Hair. The big difference here, hair raising, not exactly that good, just 1 green mana to pump something equal the number of creatures you control. The problem with Pollen Shield Hair and the hair raising is it's a sorcery, so you gotta do this during your main phase, and then your opponent's like, I guess I'll block the one that's a 20/20 instead of the other ones, and then nothing really happens. What makes Frontline Rush's pump ability so much more scary is that it's an instant. So you can wait until attacks are declared, just swing with a wide board, and then wait to see whatever random 1/1 isn't blocked, put this on it, and hit your opponent for like 5 or 10 damage, probably just close out the game on the spot. The other reason to be hyped about this card is we already have homes for it. Like, if you look at any of the Convoke decks, the Imodain Recruiter, Knight Errant of Eos decks, they're Boros, they're Jeskai, we've seen a few color combinations. Resolute reinforcements are an easy 4 of in those decks, and they're already in the right colors for Frontline Rush. So as far as I can see, this is pretty much I don't want to say strict because you are in 2 colors, but it seems like a very big upgrade compared to Resolute reinforcements. Plus now you can just play both of them in your deck, and this also might help keep the deck a little more relevant post-rotation. When Resolute reinforcements going to be leaving this summer, along with Dominaria United, Frontline Rush going to be in the format for 3 more years. I even think this card probably sees Pioneer play. We have the Boros Convoke deck in Pioneer, get additional upgrades like Venerated Loxodon. They're already playing Resolute reinforcements. If you're playing Resolute reinforcements and you're in the Boros colors, I think you just play this instead. So Frontline Rush, I know it's just an uncommon, but uncommons keep getting better and better, and I expect we'll be seeing a lot of this card in those Convoke decks in Standard and probably in Pioneer too. We also got a fine Abzan removal spell in Kintree Severance. So this is one of those weird hybrid cards. So you could cast this for 3 mana in the Abzan colors. You could cast it for 6 colorless mana, or some combination in between. So it's a 3 to 6 mana instant that says exile target permanent with mana value 3 or greater. Worth mentioning, because of the hybrid mana costs, it does trigger up the Beanstalk, which is always relevant for removal spells in Standard. So this card, I think it's competing mostly with Maelstrom Pulse. The big upside of Kintree Severance, though, is it's a Maelstrom Pulse so you can play at instant speed, which is a pretty meaningful upgrade. Of course, Maelstrom Pulse can blow up multiple things, and it doesn't have the 3 mana value or less restriction, so there's going to be matchups where this isn't great. If you're up against like Mono Red, most of their stuff is so cheap, I'm not sure what you're even targeting with this. I guess like an Urbra's Forge out of the sideboard, a Screaming Nemesis maybe, or like the Convoke decks that just flood their board with cheap creatures. So it's going to be a removal spell that can't be your primary removal spell because you're just going to get run over by aggro. But when you consider that in this Standard, we have temporary lockdowns and Holy Annexes, Caretaker's Talents, Kaidos, Monument to Endurance, Urbra's Forge, big creatures like Shieldred, there are a lot of really important and a surprisingly diverse number of permanents that you need to be able to kill in this Standard, and Kintree Severance actually does a really good job of sniping a lot of them. Doesn't matter if it's an enchantment or a creature or a planeswalker or an artifact, still going to get the job done as long as its mana value is 2 or greater, and exiling is a meaningful upside. We've seen like people Monument to Endurance and Helping Hands and get it back from the graveyard, so being able to just make sure it's gone forever is a meaningful upgrade. So I think Kintree Severance, good enough the Beanstalk decks. If we have some sort of Abzan Bean decks, this is probably in it, and I think it's a good like secondary removal spell. You don't drop all your cut downs and go for the throats and just play 4 of these, but I think as like a 1 of or a 2 of as a backup, kind of in that Maelstrom Pulse style slot, I think this card could actually be very solid in Standard. Of course, there is also a bit of draft chaff that you can check out over at MTGpreviews.com. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers for today. So let me know what you think. How ridiculous is that uncommon Sultai Dragon? What about the rest of the cards? Let me know in the comments, and I'll be back, I think tomorrow. It'll depend on how many spoilers we get. Tomorrow or Friday with one more daily dose of Tarkir Dragonstorm spoilers. So until then, have a lovely day, everyone, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more magic? We can find yesterday's spoiler video here, or maybe the budget magic, where we played a 0 rare $30 build of Caves in Standard.